Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Hashtag Real Talk with me, your host, Aaron Bragg, or more commonly known as your guide through the crazy, foggy world that is information security. So, I have a very wonderful topic and a very, very special guest today. The topic that we're going to cover is we're going to talk AI threat intelligence and threat intelligence in general from the leader or the guru or the founding father or the person that came up with the awesome title X-forcereport, Charles Henderson. We're going to be getting into several different key topics around the brand new 2024 IBM Threat Intelligence Insight Report, or the X-Force report. So I need to be quiet for a minute and tell me about how you got into the wonderful world of information security.
So, I grew up a hacker. We'll call it my time of independent study, and really before there was an industry, I was interested in infosec. I was interested in vulnerability research. I was more interested in how things broke than how things worked. And about the time I got out of school, it morphed into possibly being a career. You started to see the infosec career path become a thing. You saw penetration testing groups, things like that. And that appealed to me instantly, and a career was born. And along the way, I was involved in several startups. And about a little under 9 years ago, IBM came to me and said, "Hey, we're going to reboot this X-Force brand, and we need somebody to do it. And you've done some really interesting things in your career. Would you be interested in doing it?" And I came in, and first step was starting X-Force Red. Um, Somebody else came in, a woman by the name of Wendy Whitmore. She started X-Force Iris because you can't use blue at IBM. It has other connotations. So, you can, I guess blue team's okay, but you can't use it in marketing lingo. So Iris was in intelligence, our incident response and intelligence services. When Wendy left, the two organizations kept going for a little bit. They said, "You know what? We should merge it and bring back the old X-Force." And so we did X-Force. And since then, I've been running it. And it's been an exciting journey. I run a team of hackers, responders, and intelligence analysts, and we come together to perform some of the coolest red teaming, offensive security stuff. We do, a ton of incident response and threat hunting, and then finally we track the bad actors of the world with a leading intelligence service. Pretty much the coolest job in the world. If
And your budget's probably
16-year-old me
bigger than
saw this,
mine.
it would be amazing. Oh boy.
Okay, all right. We got a lot to cover in a short amount of time, so I'm going to jump right in. So what we're doing is we're gonna break down the report. We're gonna talk about specific topics, the key ones being around AI and other interesting tidbits. And we'll get into some of the red teaming that he did. Don't worry for your pen testers that are listening in. We'll get into some of the cool hacker stuff. Um, what is the biggest thing that surprised you from your findings, right? Because you get a lot of these reports from these different industries. IBM's has such a broad swath, right? When you talk about companies that are, say, well, we're global, they have one or two locations here and there, but for you guys, it's truly global. So, what was one of the biggest surprises that you saw with this report?
So, over the last year, I had a sense that we saw credential-based attacks rise and maybe phishing go down a little bit. And I say a little bit. In this kind of report, if you say we have a 5 or a 10 or maybe even a 15% upswing anywhere, you're talking a big number, right? And it's something to pay attention. That should perk you up. And when I saw the numbers, I saw a 71% rise in credential-based attacks. And that's a huge number. That's astounding. And at the same time, phishing was down 44%. I think, while the fact that they were moving in those directions didn't surprise me, the size of those numbers left me a little awestruck. And that's pretty rare because usually I feel like I've got a real good bead on where those numbers are going to line up. And I think that's evidence of the fact that, the criminals are running businesses. They have HR departments, they have, payment plans, they have bonus comp, they have all these things, right? And they're running it like, you would coming out of business school. They're running it to a number, and they're focused on ROI, and they're focused on margins, and they're focused on revenue. And what they're figuring out is it's a lot cheaper to log in than break in. And what that means is if I can go and buy credentials on the dark web or from some sort of access broker, and I can just log into the target of my choice, that actually is going to present a higher ROI than employing somebody to break in. The cost it's more effective. And that also means that you don't have to quite fish as much because your initial point of access isn't necessarily going to be phishing anymore. And so those two things combined, I think have really changed the attack pattern. And it's not necessarily a technical change because lateral movement still the same, all that stuff. But it is definitely I think a business change, you could say, for the threat actors. And certainly you can think of it as a change in their go-to-market.
And the amount of money, right, that not only they're making, but you brought up a key point, right? I think a lot of people that are on the outside of security don't really understand the fact that this is becoming more and more business oriented, not even not even counting, criminal organizations. Think about that report that Brian Krebs had, I think late last week, where he was doing insights into one of the Chinese companies, or sorry, independent companies that works with nation state, right? So here's a separate company that runs it like a corporation that's working for China. So that is very interesting, and I do agree with you because I thought phishing would be up, and we'll get into like how AI I think is wreaking havoc in a minute. So,
and by the way, keep in mind, we've actually seen attackers through leaked communications put their team members on performance improvement plans.
what?
Yeah, I mean, this is when I say, I mean, it redefines organized and organized crime. So, I mean, this is a well-oiled machine. And when you're talking about this, you talk about the amount of money. It's not just for the attackers, it's also for the defenders. When you have a credential-based attack, it is way more expensive to respond to that. It's like
Good point.
Almost 200%. It's 190% more expensive to respond to a credential-based attack than it is a break-in attack. Because a break-in attack, you have this audit trail of like where it went wrong. Oh, here's the alert that we missed, right?
Yep.
Or here's the alert that we should have acted differently. What you should have acted differently on the login? Finding a login. Think about that. When you're trying to recreate what happened and you're going back and you're saying, what happened here? You're going for a needle in a haystack now. It's going to be way more expensive to do the incident response to figure out where the initial point of entry is.
Good point. So one of the other items that I loved about the report is you talked about that your team foresees upcoming universal AI attack service, right? So the report talks to how the rush to adopt AI is outpacing the industry's ability to understand these risks that these new capabilities will introduce. So in the prep session that you and I had, you talked about how your team was learning new subversion tactics, right, to get around AI controls. If I remember correctly, you were able to convince the AI that what you were asking it to do wasn't unethical. So can you talk about that one a little bit?
Sure. We actually, Stephanie Carruthers, otherwise known as Snow in the industry, was able to convince an AI that it was actually an ethical and just request to write this phishing email. And for especially when you're dealing with threat actors that may not natively speak the language they're trying to write the phishing email in, it can be very effective to use an AI or LLM to write this phishing email for you to be more effective. I would also say that this is our chance to make the future better. Criminals are not attacking AI yet, and they aren't because the ROI isn't there. There's not enough market penetration of AI to make it worthwhile to concentrate on AI. That is going to change. And in our rush to adopt AI, if we don't bake in security from the beginning and we're trying to retrofit it later, we're going to be behind the 8 ball. So, and we've been down this road before. Every time we have something that the market gets enthusiastic about and stock prices start getting a little silly and all these things, there is a tendency, I will say, to rush to market and cut certain things out of the progression. Security has historically been one of those things that will worry
100%. 100%.
Don't do it. If you're an organization and somebody's telling you, we'll bake in security later, call BS. Say, no, we're doing it now. It is a responsible thing. Because it's not just the AI itself. The story about what Stephanie did with AI, that's cool. That helps you understand an attack vector. But more importantly, what about all the infrastructure you're rolling out to support your AI? Have you tested that? That's just good hygiene. And I bet the answer is no for a lot of organizations. And so, that's something that we're trying to really drive home with a lot of our partners and with, our client base is, hey, the time to test this isn't, once you have a chance, it's now. Bake it in from the beginning. It'll be cheaper, and you don't want to realize you have a problem because your problem is enormous.
I can tell you from experience, even though I almost did forget the disclaimer, opinions in this episode do not necessarily reflect my awesome healthcare employer. That being said, how much do you think this will get worse? For example, I reached out to a couple of local CEOs from some prominent local companies here in West Michigan that are indeed global. We have furniture manufacturing and other things in this area. One of them, and I quote, said, the longer term, I think we'll have to worry about attackers trying to attack and leverage AI technologies that are being utilized by organizations, which I asked him that question before the report came, or asked him for his input. He gave me that before the report came out, and it ties directly into that. So how much worse do you think it will get before large corporations will be like, wow, we don't have a choice. We have to do this. Do you think it's going to have to be a couple big blunders or, bigger than the Samsung ChatGPT thing? How much more do you think it'll get worse?
The cynical side of me worries that it's going to get a lot worse. And I'll tell you why. Right now, no one's attacking AI. So we get the false sense of security. Why do I spend money on something that no one's attacking? And it's not that no one's attacking. It's no one's attacking yet. There's a word missing from that sentence.
Yet.
And it's sort of the meme fixed it for you. We have a unique opportunity here to get in front of attacks. That's very rare in our industry. You know that. Anyone that's been in InfoSec says, hey, so we should be taking this opportunity. And candidly, if you look at the overall expense here, security is a drop in the bucket. The biggest issue is, and this is a call to the industry at large, we need to help deploy AI in a secure fashion rather than being a roadblock to AI getting deployed. There's a difference there. And as making security enabler, I think we can get out in front of it and we can potentially avoid being the I guess, horrible warning for the industry. I guess you have I'm going to butcher the quote, but we have a chance to be a shining example or a horrible warning, which is it, but look, I think that the cynical side of me does say, hey, somebody's going to be the poster child for why you secure AI here. And the question is it going to be your organization?
Do you think it's something as simple as no matter how big the company is, right? You can do some basic blocking and tackling even with AI security, right? No matter how big of a company you are, you can stand up an AI center of excellence, right? You maybe only have 25 people in your IT program, make three of them part of your COE, right? Build some of those initial security policies, figure out which things you're going to allow. Are you going to allow code conversion, right? Like that's public, and I can't get in trouble for saying that. That's public knowledge. Like one of the first use cases that we did was code conversion, right? We're doing a major integrating two medium-sized healthcare systems. You have one X type of code here and another type of code here and code conversion. So what other things besides like an AI center of excellence, some basic AI security, what do you think these companies should do to start that path so they can get ahead of it?
Some simple threat modeling would be a great first step. It's surprising how many organizations you go into and you say, "Hey, have you thought about what can go wrong here?" Well, not really. It's really hard to protect against something when you don't know what the something is. And it's really hard to design something that's resistant to attack when you have no concept what the attack may look like, what it may feel like, what the desired outcome of the attack is. There's a lot of value in thinking like an attacker. And putting someone in that role is key. Um, you know, to that end, sometimes it's good to get an outside opinion, get somebody to do some threat modeling outside the organization. You can either look to a vendor there. I've even seen some organizations basically partner up with a non-competitive organization and do threat modeling with each other.
I like that. That's a great idea.
And it's just good to get an outside view sometimes. And maybe even do that before you bring in an expert. Because I tell you what, when you're inside an organization, you get blinded by assumptions. And it's really good to get that outside opinion. That said, at some point, the AI technologies they're gonna hit this tipping point. It's usually historically, if you look at other adoption of technology continue or timelines, it ends up being about the point at which you get like about a 50% market share out there. And that's when the ROI for criminals really starts to add up, and you see not just early adopter attacks on AI, but really meaningful AI attacks, right? And the problem is that that number has been pretty predictable, and it doesn't come on with a trickle. It's just like a you know
Fire hose.
it's a fire hose. It is the criminal equivalent of the dot-com boom. It's everybody's doing it. And there are other indicators like having three or less technologies kind of be the market leaders, so to speak. When you start to get that, when you send the signals to the criminals that, hey, we can focus on something specific here and make money. That's when it happens. So we have the lead time. We just need to do something with it. And keep in mind, the time that we waste, AI is really, really hot right now in the market. If you don't have an AI strategy as an organization, you will soon. And the question is, do you have an accompanying security strategy for that AI strategy?
So that ties nicely, right? So you talk about, 50% is that expected threshold, which goes back nicely to what you were talking about with your seeing these, these organization be even more organized. It's still tripping me out that there's performance reviews on like like hackers, right? But it does totally make sense. So knowing that, let's pause the report a little bit and talk about something that's goes back to relevant to the report is, what was it, 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago, OpenAI introduces Sora, right? So for some of those you listening for the first time that may not know, this is a text to video solution, right? And if the old days, if you want to see something that'll make you laugh, and poor Will Smith, he's got picked on a lot this last year. Go look to see Will Smith eating spaghetti a year ago that was generated by AI. And then now I want you to go see some of the demos. And yes, obviously OpenAI is going to pick the best ones, but still the fact that the best ones are insane, is it really going to be help with that tipping point to where we talked about, where one of the CISOs talked about how we're going to be using these technologies to do stuff like, voice cloning and everything else. So knowing that that threshold is coming, what are your thoughts about that recent announcement about Sora, and then tying into something where the Chinese hackers are using deep fakes to do mobile banking attacks? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, anytime you get a new technology, all the way going back to like email, there is a blind consumer trust in the technology. In other words, at the very beginning of email, when you got an email and it said that it was coming from the president of the United States, you believed it. Okay. And then people caught on, hey, this could be fake. And there's a gap there between it being used in a fake manner and the majority of the population catching on. And that's kind of the wild, wild west period, we'll call it. That's the craziness. Okay. After that, you have a period where even people who are informed still fall for the fish. I very often sit up in front of a group of security professionals and say, raise your hand if you've never fallen for a fish. And you always have one or two people that raise their hand and lie. That is absolutely.
And lie. I like that.
There's
lying.
No one in that room that hasn't fallen for a fish at least once. Okay. Even if you didn't click on the link, you at least were moving the mouse over there. You were moving the cursor.
And that counts. And that counts.
Okay. And if you haven't, I'll set you up on a play date with my social engineering team and we'll change that for you. Okay. But what that means is even after the Wild West period where you educate the consumer, you're not going to ever get back to 100% validation. Your level of fidelity will never again be 100%. That is Pandora's box. It is over. And I think we are heading towards this scenario. The question is, and you've seen like some, we'll call them test balloons that have gone out where they may have effectively elicited a wire transfer or something like that. But it isn't like my junk email folder that has 30 phishing attempts a day either. So when does it hit that unbelievable noise ratio? I really can't answer that, but I do think it's coming. I think that criminals are smart enough not to just inundate everybody with fakes, because then it loses, if everyone's doing a fake, then they're less effective. So I think you see a measured start to it, but I do think that the inundation period may come. And that's really kind of a sad thing, because I think it changes a lot of our trust patterns. You know what I mean? And it would be interesting to adapt. One of the things I always talk to people about phishing is it's amazing how you will do things on a phishing email, or people will do things in regard to a phishing email that they never do in person. If somebody came up to you on the street and just randomly walked up to you and told you that they were your doctor, or that they worked at your doctor's office and they needed your social security number to process a payment, there's no way you would say yes. But in email, it's like, yeah, that sounds good. You got my doctor's office name wrong, but I'm still going to give you my social security number. It's there's an element of blind faith in technology, which is, I think, as a technologist, I'm touched by it that these people have blind faith in what we're doing, but it's unwarranted just the same. We need to have a healthy dose of skepticism out there.
Which ties nicely into one of the other, because I said I pinged a couple different CISOs. One of the other CISO talked about, and I quote, easier to perform perfect grammar and templates for phishing and other social engineering attacks. When I asked, like, what are the things that you most worried about, especially in the area in the industry that this person works in, because there's a lot of money, right? This CISO, it works for a company that does lots and lots of money. So all it takes is that one. There's the old security adage, right? The bad guys only have to be right once. We have to be right all the time. And you have stuff like this that's just going to make it harder. So I'm gonna pivot a little bit, and we're gonna talk a little bit about the report again. Um, Obviously, you talk in the report about like the widespread, sorry, exploitation of like managed file transfer tools, right? In the report, it talks about, the high risk nature of MFT, managed file transfer tools. Um, but I want to spin that a little bit in light of the possibility of last week's attack on a major healthcare provider, right, being caused by a remote access solution, right? So now you have another avenue, remote access solutions, managed file transfers. Do you think companies can leverage AI to help, to help figure some of this stuff out, right? Like maybe this is a good plug for Watson X, but it feels like there's something that we can do with this that could help. What did you see from the report?
So you look at where we're going. The drop in ransomware, 12%. Um, that should be a good sign. It's not. It just means that they're pivoting to other forms like data theft, info stealing, malware, stuff like that. So I start looking at that and say, what do we do now? I mean, the answer to ransomware seems to have been a cross of legislation and backups. People found that when they paid the ransom, they were just financing their next big problem. And you had governments around the world say, hey, we're going to make it really difficult for organizations to pay the ransom, either through reporting requirements or a bunch of other stuff. So what do we do now that they're pivoting to info stealing and either selling the info, extorting the company, all sorts of things? Well, I think that one of the problems we have, especially in large organizations today, is we don't really know where our data is. And I think that as I look to the horizon of AI, I think, wow, wouldn't it be great? The classic phrase in security, wouldn't it be great if AI could help us understand where our data is and help us understand what of our data is at most at risk, where the nexus between criticality, confidentiality, ease of access to an attacker, all these things is, and could say, hey, you've got data sitting out here that needs to move, or you shouldn't be using this file transfer tool for it. This process is inherently broken because currently most organizations find out about these broken processes when there's an incident. There's nothing else. They could maybe bring in a bunch of consultants who go out and do some sort of crown jewel exercise and find out where the data is. But is that 100%? Are you finding everything out? Or are you just making it better?
Well, especially if they don't have, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but this'll get you going and help with the context, especially if they're not far along on their data governance or data maturity, right? How
mean
can
like every
you?
organization out there?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, keep going.
I
So
mean,
the discovery part, let's talk about that a little bit because that does sound like it's an action item, right? So one of the other things about my podcast, right, is I want people to have takeaways and action items for when they listen in. So you bring up a good point. If you could maybe even do a high level classification, right? Even no matter how big you are, baby steps on data governance, it does sound like you're saying that we're moving to a spot, whether it's IBM or something else, where you can use these tools to do discovery. What's how hard do you think that is? Is it something where they could do baby steps into it, or where do you see that going?
I mean, baby steps are at least movement in the right direction, conceivably. So I think you can do baby steps first. I mean, we need progress right now. Okay. And you know, I think we're in a new world order where compromise equals extortion. Okay. Um, and don't think that extortion's the end of it, by the way. It's just that's the first step. Okay. Um, and data theft has become key again. Not since the height of the credit card theft epidemic have we seen where there's been such a premium on data. And it's not credit cards anymore. Social security numbers, it's passwords, it's employee records, it's customer records, it's all the things that make an organization tick. Data has an intrinsic value to attackers now. Okay. It's always had an intrinsic value, but the value to attackers has been debatable. Now it can be monetized. There's lots of monetization strategies. There's different market forces for criminals. Okay. And I think that, well, what we need to do is say, okay, how can we use AI to change these market forces, make them less enticing for criminals? And make no mistake, at that point, they'll find something else that's interesting to do because it's not like criminals are going to go
Well, it's
these
always going to be cat and
organizations
mouse.
and say, that's it, I'm out. Got to go into the guitar selling business or something like that. Now, there's going to be a change then, and we're going to have to catch up. But the good news is, I think we're starting to see the tools that can really help us develop defenses that scale.
Do you think that the downside of that, right? We've talked about a couple of the good things about it. Do you think this will be like an evolution for like malware delivery, right? Do you foresee a future where a Gen AI tool could be just another, mechanism for delivering malware into an organization?
I think we're going to find new and interesting ways to deliver malware no matter what happens, whether it's involving AI or not. There's an amazing creativity when it comes to not just the malware itself, but the delivery mechanism for that malware. And I think that, there's a point at which you're going to see a novel attack path for the delivery, and we're going to all say, oh my God, this is the end of the world. But it's really not. It'll just be the next thing we have to protect. I will say that anytime there is a new technology, and I'll go back to the email analogy earlier, it presents a new trusted medium to get malware there, because there's just a blind trust. There's a lot of evolution going at once. People are absorbing a lot of data. They're trying to figure out how to use a new system. They're trying to understand what it is, what the evolution in technology that they're seeing means to them. And it means that common sense sometimes goes out the window. So we've got to educate not just our employees, but our consumers as to their, proper behavior, the risks, things like that. Because very often organizations say, oh, we're going to do employee education. And they skip the consumer education. And it turns out if your consumers don't trust your technology because they get taken advantage of, even if it isn't your technology's fault, that's going to be damaging for your organization. So, here's a chance to really make sure we think about everybody using technology, not just our employees.
No, that's an avenue that I didn't think about a little bit before. Like a good example of that, right, is where, finance companies were putting out, the two-factor, right? Sending you a code. I'm logging into, bank XYZ, username, password,
Thank you for
bam,
not
they
using a
send
real
you the
bank name, by the way.
I thought about saying one. I'm like, wait a minute, they might be a customer of yours, so
Oh,
I don't want to get in
please
trouble.
don't.
But they send that text message back, and in the early days of that part of SMS multi-factor, right? They said, here's your code. Since then, they've added things on, like we will never ask you for this
Yeah.
code, right? But it shows you, especially in the finance industry, how they're adapting. They're
You
trying to
left out a step
educate
though. Originally, they put it on the bank account and they just said it somewhere on your bank account page, we'll never ask you for the code. The problem is you didn't see that until after you logged in and
100%.
yeah. So, um, yes, absolutely. But and that is a great example. I think technology companies and everybody else out there in between, whether it be uh, any kind of critical infrastructure, whether it be from a construction company to a any kind of manufacturing, industrial, anything like that. They can learn a lot from the finance industry because the finance industry for the longest time has had to worry about their consumers getting taken advantage of. Because why do you rob banks? Well,
Because
that's where
that's where the money's at.
yeah, but here's the thing. Manufacturing is actually the number one targeted industry now. They've
Didn't know that.
supplanted FSS for like 3 years.
Didn't know
So
that.
yeah. So here's the funny thing. Real world consequences of attacks. The fact that I can shut down an assembly line with malware attack, and then I can affect really strategically a business means I'm more likely to get extortion money. I'm more likely to get a real world consequence that I can use to monetize. And criminals have figured out those ways. But the thing is, the way financial services got to be number two on the list instead of number one is they really dedicated themselves to thinking like an attacker and trying to help their customers, as well as their employees, as well as those they interact with, to be secure. And you look at that and you say, other verticals need to learn that. And what financial services did in getting down to number two, which doesn't sound like a huge win, but again, that's where the money is. And
Still millions and millions and millions of
yeah,
dollars saved.
nothing monetizes quite like cash, my friend. Nothing. So if you want to think about convincing criminals to go after others instead of you, financial services to get to number two, huge win. Okay. And so these other organizations can learn from their strategies. And I think very often when I talk to clients, they say, hey, what are other people in my industry vertical doing? That's a great first question, as long as it's followed by what are industry verticals that are highly successful in lowering uh, um, their
Ah,
profile? What are they
yep,
doing?
yep.
Because I mean, and that's why these industry verticals, rise and fall together because they're all copycatting each other. They're not looking outside their vertical.
Well, I here's a kudo for my leadership because I didn't think about it for the longest time. I had leaders talk about, well, we don't healthcare security isn't always the best, to your point, right? So we don't want to be the best in our vertical. We want to emulate the best of the best, right? So if we get, like my CISO talks about, like, that good enough, like what is ever good enough? Because you could spend infinite enough money to try and be 100% secure, and you're never going to be 100% secure. Otherwise, your business is not going to make money. So what is that magic number, right? Is it 85% secure? The stuff that you're talking about. Was there any point in the reports where you started seeing general trends, right? So we talk about some of the bad things in the report. What are some of the general trends that you saw that gave you a little bit of hope?
So, I look at the decrease in ransomware and I say that should be a blueprint for other things where we can make it less economically viable for criminals. Granted, it's not a win necessarily in that it just went elsewhere. It became info stealing malware and extortion, other types of extortion. I see that is at least a win, whereas the 44% drop in phishing is just because they have valid credentials and don't need to phish anymore. So I see sort of glimmers of hope there. I see the fact that organizations are, and we can even go back to a previous report of ours, cost of the data breach that came out in fall of last year. You see organizations that engage law enforcement in a breach scenario are far more likely to spend way less time and way less money recovering from that breach. So you're seeing organizations more likely, in fact, on the heels of that, especially in the late part of last year and early part of this year, to engage law enforcement straight away. Okay. So we're seeing some of the understanding of the behaviors that make a situation less bad. Okay. I wouldn't say make it good, but definitely less bad. And I think that for me is a real bright spot takeaway. The fact also that with the decrease in ransomware, organizations are more readily able to recover from ransomware is a huge win. You don't know how many, in the early days of ransomware, you get in on these breaches and the organization, you say, do you have backups? And the first day, the answer was always yes. Okay. Day two, it was like a choose your own adventure. Day two, it would either be, one of 5 answers. Turns out we don't have backup. And option 2 was we have backup, but we're not sure about the fidelity. Option 3 was, okay, we have backups, but I think they're old. And you kind of go down the list and you realize, okay, this is going to be bad. Now, the majority of the time, the organization say, hey, in terms of getting back online, we have backup. We want to make sure that we don't just replay this again, though. Okay? So it's a much better response. I think that organizations as a whole are better prepared to deal with a breach today than they were 5 years ago. The flip side of that is there was a lot that happened over that 5 years that led up to that preparedness. And we cannot keep, as an industry, going, preparing by breach. That is not the optimal method of security education. Okay. And I think we're getting better at it, but I think we've got a long way to go.
That is a wonderful way to end the segment. So for those of you that want to TLDR, too long didn't read of that part, cyber resiliency going into back part of 2024 and 2025, look at your cyber resiliency. Okay, we are unfortunately out of time. I knew this one was going to go quickly. Thank you again, Charles. This was wonderful. Great on the report. I gotta kick it over to Julia or Scott. Which one of you is gonna do the awesome plug for the great company that is IBM? Is it gonna be you, Julia?
Yeah, I can do it.
All right. In 2 minutes or less, why would a company want to give IBM an hour of their time to talk about some of the great tools that you guys have?
IBM is a leading provider of global hybrid cloud and AI and consulting expertise. We help clients in more than 175 countries capitalize on insights from their data, streamline business processes, reduce costs, and gain the competitive edge in their industries. More than 4,000 government and corporate entities in critical infrastructure areas such as financial services, telecommunications, and healthcare rely on IBM's hybrid cloud platform and Red Hat OpenShift to affect their digital transformations quickly, efficiently, and securely. IBM's breakthrough innovations in AI, quantum computing, industry-specific cloud solutions, and consulting deliver open and flexible options to our client. All of this is backed by IBM's long-standing commitment to trust, transparency, responsibility, inclusivity, and service. The 2024 IBM X-Force Threat Intelligence Index is now available on IBM.com.
Wow. I got to say, over 100 episodes of doing that, I've never had somebody that was so clear, so concise, fit all of that stuff. And I think you were well under 2 minutes. And I will say this, Julia. One, again, thank you for helping make all this stuff happen. I appreciate it. Two, happy birthday to IBM. 100 years. That's pretty good. I only hope to live at 100 years. And then finally, we'll talk about the charity. So IBM's helping us with this. Almost all the proceeds are going to be going to the Blue Envelope Suicide Prevention Program. So Corewell Health, the awesome company that I work for, is a partner with the School Blue Envelope Health Program. It helps train middle and high school faculty and staff so that an everyday school employee, from a teachers, coaches, bus drivers, would know how to respond to a student who may express thoughts of suicide. The Blue Envelope Protocol for Crisis Management was developed internally to quickly activate patient safety responses by communicating the code words Blue Envelope. So children's mental health is hugely important to me because one of my children has autism and unfortunately deals with bouts of depression. So this stuff is very, very important to me. Many thanks to IBM for helping support raising money for this. Finally, again, Charles, thank you very much. Hopefully this was entertaining for you as it was to me and the listeners.
Yeah, I had a great time. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.